She thought it was just another blind date. One more quiet morning, one more stranger. But that man wasn't who she expected. He wore an old gray coat, spoke gently, and carried a kindness the world rarely sees anymore. What she didn't know was that he carried a secret too, one that would test her faith, break her heart, and lead her straight into a miracle she never saw coming. Because sometimes, God hides His greatest blessings in the people we least expect. If stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a comment below. Your support helps us keep bringing real stories of love, faith, and the quiet miracles that still happen every day. Thank you for watching. May God bless you and your family with peace and gentle strength. The first hard winds of October came down from the Front Range and swept through Maple Creek, Colorado, with the dry bite of high country air that makes old porch flags snap like whips and leaves in the gutters skitter as if chased by something invisible. The town sat nestled in a shallow valley, surrounded by ridges already dusted with snow. Mornings smelled of pine resin and chimney smoke, and the air carried that sharp kind of cold that wakes a person whether they want it or not. The streets were narrow, lined with weathered wooden shops whose painted signs had begun to peel from too many winters. On the corner where Main met Willow stood Maple & Co., a small brick cafe with ivy that clung stubbornly to its facade. Its windows were fogged from the warmth inside, where the scent of roasted coffee and freshly baked scones softened the edges of the cold morning. Inside, time seemed slower, the chatter gentle and the light golden from old lamps. Emily Parker pushed through the door, bells chiming above her. She was 32, a third-grade teacher at Maple Creek Elementary. She had the delicate build of someone who had learned to carry life's weight with quiet endurance. About 5'6", slender but strong. Her dark brown hair framed her face in soft waves, cut to her shoulders. Her complexion carried a faint olive hue, and her gray-green eyes, often cautious, brightened only when she forgot to guard herself. Today, she wore a navy wool peacoat, a beige scarf, and boots that had clearly seen more than one snowy winter. Emily wasn't here for pleasure. She was here because her aunt, the woman who raised her after her mother's death, had insisted she try again. Just one more date, Emily. You never know. Emily did know. She knew the awkward silences, the forced laughter, the empty promises. But still, she came. Behind the counter, Jonah, the barista, smiled as she approached. He was a tall, thin young man, with hair the color of dry wheat and a soft mustache that never quite decided whether it wanted to grow. There was kindness in his eyes, the sort that doesn't need to speak. "Chamomile tea with honey?" he asked, already reaching for the kettle. She smiled. "You remember." "Hard to forget the teacher who grades papers at my counter every Thursday," Jonah replied with an easy grin. Emily took her tea and looked around. Then she saw him. Sitting by the window was Ethan Cole, the man her aunt had arranged for her to meet. He stood when she approached, a habit of courtesy that felt almost out of time. Ethan was 38, tall, with the sturdy build of someone who worked with his hands even if his work didn't require it. His dark chestnut hair was slightly tousled, a few gray strands at the temples. A short beard outlined his square jaw, neat but not fussy. His coat was gray and worn, the kind of garment repaired more than once. "Emily?" he asked, his voice calm, low, carrying a faint rasp, like gravel under wind. She nodded. "Ethan." They shook hands, his touch warm but careful, the kind that neither lingers nor withdraws too soon. He gestured toward the seat across from him. I got here early, force of habit. Coffee helps me pretend I'm patient. She smiled slightly as she sat. Chamomile tea helps me pretend I'm not anxious. That earned her a quiet laugh. The kind of laugh that comes from someone who doesn't use it often, but means it when it comes. The cafe's warmth wrapped around them. The clinking of spoons, the murmur of morning conversation, the rhythmic hiss of the espresso machine, all seemed to slow the world outside. Ethan spoke first. You teach, right? 3rd grade? Yes, she said, surprised. How did you? My friend's daughter is in your class. Maggie. Emily blinked. The one who brings in drawings of planets with names like Glitter World? He smiled. That's her. She says you read stories better than the TV does. It was a simple thing, but it softened her. Compliments about her teaching always did. They talked about books next. Ethan mentioned he liked Letters to a Young Poet. A dog-eared copy rested beside his cup. Rilke reminds me to stay quiet long enough to listen, he said. Emily tilted her head. That's not something most people admit to liking. He shrugged. Most people talk so they don't have to listen. The conversation lingered there, in that quiet honesty. Ethan wasn't charming in the practiced way most men were. He didn't try to impress. He asked about her favorite stories, the things her students taught her, whether she believed children could sense kindness in adults before adults could. When she asked what he did for a living, he hesitated just slightly. I work with schools, funding programs, support, that sort of thing. Nothing glamorous? It was vague, but not evasive. Emily nodded. You like it? I do, he said. It matters. That was all. He didn't expand, didn't list achievements or titles. Just that, it matters. They shared a scone, or rather he ordered one and offered her half. His manners were steady, almost old-fashioned. When she mentioned that her students sometimes read under their desks during math, he chuckled and said, At least they're reading. Curiosity beats compliance every time. Somewhere between her second sip of tea and his last of coffee, the tension that had clung to Emily since morning began to ease. When they finally stood to leave, Ethan held the door for her. Outside, the cold had deepened. A pale sun filtered through thin clouds, and the street carried the hush of a town between breaths. Emily turned to say goodbye, but Ethan's attention had shifted. A few steps away, near a newspaper stand, sat a German shepherd, its coat a mix of sable and silver, its amber eyes watchful but gentle. The dog's ears perked when it saw Ethan, tail wagging. Ethan knelt down, his hand brushing the dog's head with practiced affection. Hey, buddy, he said softly. Then, with a small smile, wait here a bit, okay? Lily's almost done at school. Emily froze. The name hung in the air. He looked up, realizing she'd heard. My daughter, he explained simply. She's 7. The dog leaned into his touch. Emily found herself smiling, though she didn't fully understand why. There was something about the sight. This man, the gentle way he spoke to his dog, the mention of a child, that made the world feel suddenly steadier. She said goodbye, walking toward her car with the faintest warmth spreading in her chest. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like the date had been a waste of time. Behind her, Ethan stood by the cafe window, the German shepherd sitting loyally by his side, both of them framed by the thin sunlight of a Colorado morning. 3 days after that quiet morning at Maple & Co., the sky over Maple Creek turned a pale, washed-out blue, the kind that promised rain but hadn't yet decided when. Emily stood outside the school gate, arms full of papers, watching her students spill out into the afternoon chill. Maple Creek Elementary was a modest building of red brick and fading paint, its playground ringed by tall pines that whispered when the wind came down from the mountains. She loved this hour. The tired laughter, the clatter of lunchboxes, the way the day folded gently into evening. That was when she saw him again. Ethan Cole stood by the sidewalk, his gray coat buttoned to the throat, one hand holding a folded umbrella, the other resting on the leash of a German shepherd. The dog, now unmistakably familiar, sat obediently beside him, its coat a beautiful blend of sable and black, muscles defined under the thick fur, eyes alert yet kind. The animal was about 5 years old, she guessed, with the steady composure of a creature that understood loyalty as a language. Beside Ethan was a little girl, Lily. She couldn't have been more than 7, slender like a sapling, her hair the color of pale wheat, pulled into a messy braid that kept slipping free. Her face was small and open, with a light dusting of freckles across her nose, and her blue-gray eyes carried an odd mixture of wonder and old soul, like someone who had seen too much sadness to be entirely carefree, yet hadn't lost the ability to hope. She wore a puffy pink jacket a size too big and clutched a drawing pad to her chest. "Mr. Cole," Emily greeted, trying not to sound surprised. Ethan turned, recognition breaking into a slow, genuine smile. "Miss Parker," he said. Then, noticing her papers threatening to scatter, quickly stepped forward. "It's okay," she started, but the wind chose that moment to snatch a handful of sheets and send them tumbling across the yard. Rex reacted first, bounding after the papers with startling precision. The dog caught one between his teeth, another under his paw, and returned proudly, tail wagging like a metronome of joy. The sight made Lily giggle, a bright, bell-clear sound that cut through the gray afternoon like sunlight. Ethan handed Emily the rescued stack, his hand brushing hers briefly. "He's better trained than I am," he said with an embarrassed chuckle. "Apparently," Emily replied, laughing softly, her guard lowering just a little more. Lily, curiosity overcoming shyness, looked up at Emily. "Are you the teacher who reads about dragons?" she asked. Emily blinked. "You know about that?" "Dad told me," Lily said. "He said your students like when the dragon cries at the end." Emily felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I didn't think anyone remembered that part." "I like it," Lily said simply, "because sometimes even brave things get sad." It was such a small statement, but it pierced deeper than Emily expected. She crouched to Lily's level. "You're right," she said gently. "Being brave doesn't mean you don't cry." From above, Ethan watched, his expression softening in a way he rarely let show. There was gratitude in his eyes, not for the words exactly, but for the quiet understanding behind them. The drizzle began without warning, thin at first, then heavier, the kind that settles into a steady, soaking rhythm. Parents hurried to cars, children squealed and darted under backpacks. Ethan immediately opened his umbrella, large enough for 2 but not 3. "Take it," he said, extending it to Emily. She shook her head. "You'll get soaked." He smiled, rain already clinging to his lashes. "We've got hoods, and Rex doesn't mind weather." Lily tugged his sleeve. "Dad, she can stand with us. We can share." Ethan hesitated, then tilted the umbrella slightly so that all 3 of them fit beneath it. It was a clumsy arrangement. Their shoulders brushing, Rex pressed close to Ethan's leg, rain drumming above them like fingers on tin. For a moment, it was absurdly intimate. The cold air, the scent of rain and wet fur, the nearness of quiet hearts, learning each other's rhythms. Emily found herself glancing at Ethan's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way he watched his daughter first and the world second. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but there was something deeply reassuring about his presence, the way he stood solidly, as though life could throw storms at him and he'd simply plant his feet deeper. When the rain eased, they walked together toward the parking lot. Lily skipped ahead with Rex, her laughter echoing across the wet pavement. "Your daughter's wonderful," Emily said quietly. Ethan nodded. "She is. Her mother would have adored her." His voice changed slightly, not cracking but thinning, as if the words had to pass through something heavy before reaching daylight. "She died the day Lily was born." Emily's step faltered. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "Don't be. Life happens. You just learn to carry it differently." They stopped at the corner where her car waited. Rex shook himself free of the rain, sending droplets across their boots. Lily turned and waved. "Bye, Miss Parker." "Bye, Lily," Emily called, her throat unexpectedly tight. When they parted, she sat in her car for a long time, watching them disappear into the curtain of mist. The father, the daughter, and the loyal dog walking together in the rain. It should have looked lonely, 3 figures framed by gray, but somehow it didn't. It looked whole in a way Emily couldn't quite name. That night, long after she'd graded the last spelling quiz and set down her tea, Emily found herself sketching the memory of them in her notebook. The tall man with the umbrella tilted, the little girl in the pink jacket, the dog at their feet. Underneath, she wrote without thinking, "Sometimes the quietest people carry the biggest stories." Outside, the rain deepened, soft against the window, as if agreeing. The last of autumn lingered in Maple Creek, like a long sigh, its mornings crisp, its evenings soft with wood smoke, and the faint scent of apples left to rot sweetly in backyards. The days grew shorter. The sunlight, when it came, carried a gentler gold. Emily Parker's life settled into a rhythm that she didn't notice forming until it was already there, one that seemed to move in quiet parallel with Ethan Cole's. Every few days she saw him, sometimes outside the school, where Lily waved with that unguarded joy only children still possess, sometimes at the local library, where Ethan carried boxes of donated books up the worn steps. He never announced his help, never signed the donation slips with his full name, only E. Cole. When Emily thanked him once, he shook his head and said, "I just moved things from where they're forgotten to where they're needed." Lily's affection for Emily grew quickly. On Fridays, when the weather behaved, the little girl waited outside the classroom gate with Rex sitting neatly beside her. The dog's fur, thick and brushed to a dull shine, glowed russet in the late light. His ears twitched at every sound, but he never strayed from her side. "He thinks he's her bodyguard," Ethan once said, scratching behind Rex's ear. "He's right." Emily found herself visiting their small home one Saturday afternoon. The Cole house stood at the edge of town, a single-story cottage that looked older than its years, with a sagging porch rail and flower pots too small for their ambition. Ethan met her at the gate, wiping his hands on a rag. He had been sanding a piece of wood. "Fence repair," he explained. But the project had grown into something larger. "You're building a new fence?" she asked. He smiled sheepishly. "It's cheaper than therapy." Inside the yard, Lily was sitting cross-legged on the grass with crayons scattered around her. She was drawing Rex with a child's faithful exaggeration, huge paws, ears like mountains. When Emily complimented it, Lily beamed. Dad says Rex used to help Mom when she was sad, she said. Now he helps us. Emily's gaze flicked toward Ethan, who had turned back to his work, his movements steady and methodical. The late sun caught the small silver lines along his forearm, old scars, maybe from carpentry or some forgotten accident. There was strength there, but also a kind of weariness that came from shouldering things too heavy for too long. Do you ever get tired of fixing things? She asked quietly when he paused to take a sip of water. He considered. Not the things I can fix, he said. It's the ones I can't that keep me up. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. The wind had shifted colder, carrying the promise of snow. She thought of Ethan's hands, the quiet competence in them, and of how easily he had begun to appear in the small spaces of her day. It had been years since she let anyone occupy that kind of space. 2 weeks later, the first snow dusted the town. The school closed early, the children released into a world suddenly white and hushed. By evening, Emily's throat ached and her head throbbed. She tried to brush it off as fatigue, but by the time night fell, her body gave in. She texted her aunt, saying she was fine, made tea, and fell asleep on the couch with a blanket she barely managed to pull over herself. A knock came sometime later, soft, deliberate. She woke disoriented, the room dim except for the lamplight. Through the peephole, she saw Ethan standing on her porch, snow caught in his hair, his coat dusted white. In his hands was a small thermos and a brown paper bag. I heard you were out sick, he said when she opened the door, voice low to match the hour. I brought something. He didn't step inside. He simply set the thermos and bag on the mat. The warm air from her house fogged the space between them. You didn't have to, she began. He smiled faintly. I know. That's why I did. She opened the bag after he left. Chicken porridge, the kind that smelled faintly of ginger and patience. Steam curled upward, carrying comfort she hadn't realized she'd been starving for. When she glanced outside a few minutes later, Ethan was still there, sitting on the porch steps beside Rex. The dog's head rested on his knee, both of them motionless except for the small clouds of breath rising in the cold. She opened the door again, blanket around her shoulders. Ethan, it's freezing. Come in, please. He shook his head. Eat first. I'll go when you're better. Her chest tightened. You'll sit out there the whole time? He gave a small, almost playful shrug. Rex insists. So she ate, slowly, spoon by spoon, until the bowl was empty and warmth began to return to her hands. When she opened the door again, Ethan stood to leave. She stopped him, pressing a cup of hot tea into his gloved hand. I don't know how to thank you, she said softly. He met her eyes, steady but gentle. You already did. Then, almost as an afterthought, the real kindness, the kind that matters, is what people do when no one's supposed to see. It was a simple sentence, but it struck something deep. After he left, Emily sat by the window, watching his footprints fade in the falling snow. The night had settled into that thick silence only winter brings. Everything hushed, except the sound of Rex's distant bark and the echo of words that would not leave her. The next morning, she woke to find her walkway shoveled clean. She didn't need to guess who had done it. Winter had arrived for real now. Maple Creek wore its cold like a solemn coat, each morning wrapped in fog that clung to rooftops and turned breath to silver. The streets were quieter, footsteps muffled by thin snow that refused to melt. Emily Parker moved through these gray days like a ghost of herself. Since that night, Ethan sat on her porch with a bowl of soup cooling in his hands. Their worlds had begun to blur together in quiet, easy ways. Shared errands, small dinners, walks with Lily and Rex through the park, where the trees stood bare like watchful witnesses. But on the evening, everything changed. She was alone. Her living room glowed with the soft yellow of a reading lamp, the fire crackling low. She was grading essays about kindness when the television, left running for background noise, caught her ear. The anchor's voice rose with practiced enthusiasm. Tonight, the Cole Foundation pledges an additional $10 million to improve libraries across rural Colorado. The camera panned to the podium, and there he was. Ethan. Not the Ethan in the gray coat with the calloused hands and second-hand boots. This one wore a tailored navy suit, his hair neatly combed, the same face but framed in authority. Behind him, a blue banner read, Cole Education Foundation, Building Futures Together. His voice was steady as ever, calm and deliberate, but now it carried through microphones and applause. Education is where dignity begins, he said, and the room answered with cameras flashing. Emily sat frozen, the red pen slipping from her hand. Her tea went cold. The man who had fixed her fence, shoveled her walkway, sat in the snow outside her door, was a millionaire. She turned off the television. Silence folded around her like a blanket that suddenly felt too heavy. It wasn't the money. It was the deception, the quiet omission that now echoed louder than any lie. She thought of every vague answer, every half-smile when she'd asked about his work. I help schools. Nothing glamorous. The words replayed, stripped of innocence. Her phone buzzed. Ethan Cole calling. She stared until it stopped. Then she placed the phone face down. For the first time since she'd met him, she didn't want to hear his voice. 2 days passed. Snowstorms rolled in, closing schools early and trapping her indoors. She didn't answer texts. She couldn't. Her mind wouldn't let go of the image of him in that suit. She tried to read, to grade, to distract herself. But everywhere she turned in that small house, there was a trace of him. A book on the shelf he'd lent her, a mug he'd once filled with tea for her trembling hands. On the third morning, a knock came. She didn't move. Whoever it was left a small package by the door. When she finally opened it hours later, the air from outside bit her face and brought with it the faint scent of cedar. Ethan's scent. Inside the plain brown wrapping was her copy of Letters to a Young Poet. The one she had lent him weeks ago, dog-eared and worn. Tucked inside was a folded letter, written in black ink, each line steady but weighted, as if each word had been rewritten a dozen times before being allowed to stay. Emily, I've started this letter more times than I can count. Words used to come easily to me, but lately they feel like stones I have to lift one by one. You once told me that silence can be kind. I believed that. Maybe too much. Because silence, when held too long, becomes a kind of cowardice. I was afraid, not of what you'd think of me, but of what might change between us once you knew. When I lost my wife, I lost more than her. I lost my company, my peace, the part of me that believed I deserved good things. The foundation came later, built from what was left of the wreckage. I promised myself that if I ever tried to love again, I would do it as me, not as a name, not as a title, just as Ethan. I didn't tell you because you made me feel seen before I ever had to explain myself. I wasn't sure if I could bear losing that too. If there's any part of you that still believes in what we found, I'll be at Maple and Cobra this Saturday, 10 in the morning. No suits, no names. Just me. E. She read it twice, then a third time. Her tears didn't fall all at once. They came slow, like the thaw of ice. That night, Emily's aunt, Margaret, stopped by. Margaret was 60, small and wiry, her hair silver white but still thick, her eyes the color of old denim, worn but clear. She had raised Emily after her mother's death, and though the years had bent her back slightly, her voice carried the same sturdy kindness as always. "You've been quiet," Margaret said, setting down a grocery bag. "That man of yours, Ethan, he all right?" Emily hesitated. "He's not who I thought he was." Margaret studied her, then shrugged lightly. "Nobody ever is, sweetheart. The question is whether he's someone worse or someone more complicated." Emily smiled faintly. "He's both, maybe." Margaret's hand brushed her shoulder. "Complicated men are usually the ones worth understanding. Just don't let pride talk louder than your heart." That night, Emily lay awake listening to the wind against the windows. Pride and heart wrestled quietly inside her until morning. Saturday came pale and cold. She woke before dawn, the world outside silvered with frost. Her car was half buried in snow, but she didn't care. She sat at the kitchen table with the letter before her, running her fingers over his handwriting as if it were something alive. She didn't know yet if she would go, but for the first time since the broadcast, she didn't feel angry, only human. Some truths wound you, others wash you clean. Outside, a bird sang early. Saturday morning came with the hesitant light of early spring, soft and pale as the inside of a seashell. The snow that had buried Maple Creek for months was finally retreating, leaving behind wet streets that reflected the sky like silver glass. Inside Maple and Cosern, the air smelled of cinnamon and roasted beans, and the old record player hummed a faint tune that made the place feel like a memory half awake. Emily sat by the same window where everything had started months ago. Her hands circled a cup of chamomile tea that had long since gone lukewarm, but she didn't drink. She'd arrived early, 15 minutes before 10, and every few minutes she looked up at the door as if willing it to open. She told herself she didn't expect him to come. She only wanted to see the morning through the same glass where they'd once laughed. The bell above the door chimed at exactly 10. Ethan stood there, framed by the light spilling through the entrance. His gray coat, the same one he had worn the first day they met, hung slightly damp from the drizzle outside. His hair was longer now, brushing the collar, and though his face was leaner, his expression carried something unspoken. Relief, maybe, or the weight of waiting too long. Beside him, Lily held a small bundle of wildflowers, daisies and dandelions, the kind that grow stubbornly along country fences. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and Rex, their steadfast German shepherd, stood at her side, fur darkened by rain, but posture proud and alert. For a moment, no one moved. The cafe noise faded to a blur. Emily rose slowly, unsure if she was still angry or simply tired of being. Lily was the first to speak. "Miss Parker," she said, shy but hopeful, "Dad said I could pick the flowers myself." Emily's lips trembled into a smile. "They're beautiful, sweetheart." Ethan's eyes found hers, steady and searching. "I didn't come to explain," he said quietly. "Just to be here, if you'll let me." She looked at him for a long time, seeing not the millionaire, not the man from television, but the one who had knelt to feed a stray dog, who shoveled snow without being asked, who sat on her porch through the night while she was sick. "Just don't disappear again," she said finally, her voice soft but sure. He exhaled, Laughter and sorrow tangled together. I won't. Not again. When she gestured to the chair across from her, it was enough. A year passed like a deep breath released slowly into the world. The Cole home now sat at the edge of Maple Creek, a white cottage with a red porch and a picket fence that Ethan had built himself. The boards weren't perfectly even, but they held, sturdy and proud, much like the man who made them. The front yard bloomed wild with lavender and marigolds, Emily's touch, and in one corner, a wooden swing creaked gently under Lily's small weight. Mornings began with the smell of coffee and the sound of laughter. Ethan always rose early, his hair messy, his beard a day overdue for trimming. He moved through the kitchen with quiet precision, frying eggs while Lily poured milk for Rex, who waited patiently by the door, tail sweeping the floor in lazy arcs. Emily would join them last, still wrapped in her robe, her hair unpinned and eyes soft from sleep. "Dad burns the toast again," Lily would announce solemnly, and Ethan would groan, pretending offense while scraping another piece of charred bread into the bin. The simplicity of it all was what Emily cherished most. There were no grand dinners, no lavish trips, just the sound of a child humming over her cereal, the warmth of sunlight through thin curtains, the occasional bark from Rex when the mailman approached. Rex had aged a little in that year. The fur around his muzzle silvered, his gait slower, but his loyalty remained absolute. He followed Lily to the school bus each morning, then circled back to lie near Ethan's workshop, guarding without needing to be told. Ethan still ran the Cole Foundation, but now his work was quieter, less public. He stopped appearing on stages and instead visited the schools he funded in person, often anonymously. Emily sometimes joined him, watching him kneel beside children who reminded him of Lily, curious, wide-eyed, brimming with potential. In the afternoons, Emily taught at Maple Creek Elementary, her classroom brighter than ever. She often found Lily's drawings taped to her desk, a habit the girl had started to keep you company, she'd said. Life, once marked by loss and silence, had found its rhythm again. One evening in late summer, as cicadas buzzed and the sky turned rose over the hills, the three of them sat on the porch. Ethan leaned back on the swing, Emily beside him, and Lily sprawled on the steps with Rex's head resting on her lap. Emily reached for Ethan's hand. His fingers were rough with work, still bearing the faint scars of carpentry. "Do you ever miss the city?" she asked. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I used to chase noise because I didn't want to be alone with myself. Now quiet feels like proof that I'm home." Emily smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "You built this," she said softly. He looked out toward the fence, the flowers, the dim light flickering from the school across the street. "We built it," he corrected. Rex gave a single bark, as if in agreement, and Lily giggled. "He says we all did." The moment folded into laughter and silence. The good kind. The kind that didn't need filling. Fireflies began to blink across the yard, their glow reflected in Lily's eyes. Later, after Lily had gone to bed, Ethan and Emily sat together under a sky thick with stars. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded note. Her handwriting, faded now. Sometimes the quietest people carry the biggest stories. He traced the words with his thumb. "You wrote this the night I brought soup," he said. "I found it in my coat pocket months later." Emily blushed. "I wasn't sure you'd notice." "I notice everything about you," he said simply. She laughed quietly, leaning closer. "Good. Because I'm keeping you exactly like this, burnt toast, old fence, all of it." He kissed her forehead. That's all I ever wanted." Inside, the house creaked softly as if content, and outside, Rex stood sentinel at the gate, tail wagging once before settling. It wasn't the kind of love that made headlines. It didn't need to. It was the kind that showed up quietly, stayed through storms, and bloomed in the ordinary light of everyday life. And somewhere in that quiet town beneath the Colorado sky, 3 souls and 1 old dog finally belonged. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or angels' wings. They come quietly, through a kind word, a shared umbrella, a bowl of warm soup left on a doorstep. They live in the steady hands of a father who refuses to give up, in the compassion of a woman who learns to love again, in the faithful eyes of a dog who never stops waiting by the gate. In Maple Creek, there were no lightning bolts from heaven, only small mercies stitched into everyday life. Yet isn't that how God often works? Not through grand gestures, but through gentle persistence, through people like Ethan, Emily, and Lily, who remind us that love, forgiveness, and grace are the quiet miracles we walk past every day. If you're watching this story tonight, maybe it's because you needed a small reminder. You are not forgotten. Even when the world feels cold, God's light finds its way into the cracks. Love still grows. Healing still happens. Miracles still exist. Just not always the way we expect. Take a moment today. Hold someone's hand, forgive someone, or simply whisper a prayer of gratitude for what you have. That might be the miracle someone else has been praying for. May God bless you and your family with warmth, peace, and quiet strength, just like the one He gave to Ethan, Emily, and little Lily. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment about your own quiet miracle, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story of faith, love, and redemption. May God watch over you tonight and every night, reminding you that no act of kindness is ever too small to become a blessing.